Hey, second and third graders, it's Mrs. Shea here. I'm here to review your social studies chapters 1 and 2 review questions. So if you've been following along in your reading, you should have seen 2 PowerPoints that I posted this week. And if you haven't gotten to them, no problem. I would encourage you to look at those PowerPoints and do your reading before you watch this video, because if you haven't, you'll be really confused about what my questions are and the answers to them. So try to do those on your own before you watch the video, but if you haven't, or if you have already done that, go ahead and follow along. So for your first PowerPoint and your first chapter, we were talking about two main explorers, Columbus and Ponce de Leon. So for your review questions on those, I'm going to bring them up right here. Who was Columbus and what did he believe about the world? Well, your answer to that is Columbus was an Italian explorer that was hired by the king and queen, and he set out to find the East Indies. So it says in your book he went to find the East Indies, which you don't need to know what the East Indies are, but just so you know, the East Indies were a place where spices were manufactured and produced. And so he really wanted to find that place, but he ended up finding something else. So what did he believe about the world? He believed three main things that you guys need to know. He believed that the world was round, which was correct. The world is round. But he also believed two other things that were not true. The second belief he had was that the world wasn't as big as everyone thought it was. But he ended up finding that was not the case. The world is much bigger than he anticipated. The third belief was that when he set westward from Europe to Asia, it would be a straight shot. So he believed that there would be nothing else that he would find on his way to Asia. However, that was not the case. Second question is, what continents did he discover that kept people from sailing directly to Asia from Europe? The two continents you need to know about are North and South America. We live on North America, as you know, and that's what was called America. So when they refer to the Americas, they're referring to North and South America. So third question, what was the new world that he discovered? Well, he discovered North America, which was ended up calling in general the West Indies. So instead of the East Indies, he ended up discovering the West Indies. The fourth question is, what did the Spanish explorers start to establish there? So the answer to that question is called colonies. The Spanish explorers started to establish colonies. And in your reading, you read about the Native Americans who they found there that had been living there for generations and had already established many cultures and traditions and things that ways of life that you guys have already learned about in the previous unit. So when we went to Warm Springs, you guys learned about different tribes and traditions. So just like when he went to this place, they had already been established there as well. So it's really important you understand the relationship between the Native Americans and the Spanish explorers, because they disrupted what the Native Americans were doing there. The last question is, who was Ponce de Leon and what part of America did he discover? Well, Ponce de Leon was also an explorer just like Columbus, and he was set out to find something just like Columbus was, that he actually ended up finding something else. So he was a Spaniard and he was an explorer, and he really wanted to find the Fountain of Youth. So he really, really wanted to see if he could find the place where people had talked supposedly about that the Fountain of Youth was a place where people drank from the water and they lived forever. They stayed young, and it was a place that many people had never seen, but they had heard legends about. So the place that he never found before he died was the Fountain of Youth. But the place, back to the first part, what part of America did he discover? He discovered what is now called the state of Florida. So those are your 5 questions from chapter 1. So if you guys have any questions at all, go back to your reading. You will find the answer. And if you need to watch the video again, just to brush up on any of the facts, please do. So we're going to be moving on to chapter 2, De Soto's March. And on your last slide, which is slide 8 on here, the first question, there's a lot more review questions on chapter 2. So please follow along and don't get too overwhelmed. If you need a rewind, go ahead. So first question is, who was De Soto and what empire did he conquer at a young age? Well, De Soto was born in Spain and he came to the Americas when he was only 14 or 15 years old. So he was an explorer just like Columbus and Ponce de Leon. So in the early 1530s, he conquered the empire of the Inca people in Peru. So Inca is I-N-C-A, and he conquered the people in the place called Peru, P-E-R-U. So that's the answer to your first question. Second question, what did De Soto and his commander, Francisco Pizarro, achieve from their conquest, to Peru? Well, they ended up finding a ton of money. So they got really, really rich, it says in your reading. They made so much money in Peru that they could have retired and lived a life of ease. However, De Soto was pretty bored and he was getting restless. So he wanted to go out and search for more gold. So your third question is, De Soto arrived in Florida with 600 of his men at the same place Ponce de Leon died. So Ponce de Leon died in Florida, and it was from an arrow wound. But that's not something you necessarily need to know. But when De Soto arrived in Florida with his men, ready to fight the Indians, what did him and his men end up doing to the native land and people? So what you need to know for that question is they ended up burning villages. They ended up taking men captive as slaves. Some of the Indians, they took them as slaves, and they destroyed all of their land. They destroyed a lot of land and possessions that they had. It was very, very horrible. So they wanted to conquer that spot. So they basically took it over. The next question is, what strategy did the Indians, they called them Indians, but they were called Native Americans, what did they use to get rid of De Soto and his men? So the strategy that the Native Americans used was that they told De Soto and his men if they kept going farther north or farther west, that they would march into the direction of the gold that they were looking for. And so this was a strategy, which is a key word, and it's bold in your reading, that they used to solve some of their problems because they were trying to get rid of them. However, this did not solve all of their problems because after the natives convinced the Spaniards to march on, they had to cope with the diseases that De Soto and his men left behind. So it says, what disease did the Europeans unknowingly bring into America that ended up killing thousands of Native Americans? So even though they got rid of them, they didn't realize that when the Europeans came, so De Soto and his men, they ended up leaving behind smallpox, which was a very fatal disease, fatal meaning it killed a lot of people. So smallpox spread and thousands and thousands of Native Americans died from this disease. In your last question, it says, in 1541, what river did De Soto and his men discover? It was and still is the most important river in North America. And why was it so valuable to the native and future pioneers and farmers? So your last question in the answer to that is the Mississippi River. So you read quite a bit about the Mississippi River and how a lot of the rivers go into the Mississippi River. And it still is the most valuable river that we have here in North America today. And the reason why it was so important for future natives and pioneers and farmers is that a lot of people use that river to water their land and to harvest and to even actually to travel. So it talks about how De Soto and his men, some of the Spaniards actually traveled down the Mississippi River to get down to Mexico, I believe. So the Mississippi River is the main answer that you need to know, that the Mississippi River is and was still the most important river in North America. Thank you guys for following along. If you guys have any questions to this review questions for both sides, feel free to message me. Otherwise, keep doing your reading, and I will be posting a video shortly about your following chapters that you'll be reading.